The morning Elias Drummond's reputation collided with an orc woman's honor began 3 days earlier, when Marta Henshaw's mare started foaling wrong in the dark. Elias had been closing the forge for the night when the widow came running, breathless and wild-eyed, begging him to come quick because the mare was thrashing and screaming, and something was terribly wrong. He grabbed his leather apron and followed her through the village at a run, past shuttered windows and sleeping houses, to the small paddock behind her cottage where the mare lay on her side, flanks heaving, eyes rolling white with pain. One look told him the foal was breech. Both hooves were visible but nothing else, and the mare was exhausting herself trying to push what would not come. Elias knelt in the dirt and straw, rolled up his sleeves, and began the careful, bloody work of turning a foal that did not want to be turned. The mare screamed and kicked. Marta held the lamp and prayed aloud to 3 different saints, and somewhere in the middle of it all, another figure appeared at the paddock fence, tall and green-skinned in the lamplight, and vaulted over without asking permission. The orc woman introduced herself as Fenna Farrow, horse dealer for the northern clans, and she had better hands for this than he did. Elias was too tired and too worried about the mare to argue. She knelt opposite him, her sleeves already pushed past her elbows, and together they worked in tense silence, repositioning the foal inch by inch while the mare groaned and shuddered. When the foal finally slid free in a rush of fluid and membrane, both of them were soaked to the shoulders, and Marta was weeping with relief. The foal was alive. Barely, but alive. Fenna cleared its nostrils and rubbed it briskly with straw until it coughed and began to breathe on its own. The mare, exhausted, nosed her baby and nickered low in her throat. Elias sat back on his heels, wiping his face with the back of his hand, and realized the sky was beginning to lighten in the east. Marta pressed coins into both their hands, though Fenna tried to refuse. Elias walked with the orc woman back toward the village center as dawn broke, their clothes stiff with drying blood and birth fluids, talking easily about horses and difficult deliveries, and whether the foal would grow up sound. She had a quiet voice, precise and thoughtful, and hands that were far steadier than his own. At the crossroads, she turned north toward the clan encampment on the ridge, and he turned south toward his forge and the narrow house attached to it. He thought nothing more of it until 2 mornings later, when he went to the village well for water and found Amelia Voss and Carolyn Marsh standing beside it, heads bent together, counting on their fingers. "She went in at dusk," Amelia was saying, her voice low and delighted. "I saw her myself, bold as brass, walking right through his gate. And the lamp burned till dawn," Carolyn added. "My husband saw the light from our bedroom window. All night long it burned. Did anyone see her leave? No one, not a soul." Elias stood very still, the bucket handle cold in his hand. They had not noticed him yet. He cleared his throat and both women jumped and turned, their faces flushing. "Morning," he said evenly. "Good morning, Elias," Amelia said too brightly. "Lovely day, is it not?" He filled his bucket without answering and walked back to the forge, his jaw tight, already knowing it was too late. Gossip in a village moved faster than fire in dry grass, and by the time he opened the forge for business, 3 separate customers had found reasons to bring it up, their questions wrapped in concern or curiosity or poorly concealed glee. He told the truth each time. Marta Henshaw's mare. Breech foal. Long night. The orc woman had helped. That was all, but the truth was boring and the lie was already 3 houses ahead. By midday, Fenna Farrow appeared at his gate. She wore a long wool coat despite the spring warmth, and her face was carefully blank, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the strap of the satchel slung over her shoulder. "May I come in?" she asked. Elias stepped aside and gestured her into the forge yard. He had been shoeing a plow horse, and the animal stood tied to the post, one hoof still resting on the stand. Fenna glanced at it, then back at him. "I need to know what you have heard," she said without preamble. "About me. About that night," he told her. Her expression did not change, but something in her posture tightened, a careful stillness that reminded him of a deer that had scented a wolf. "And you have corrected them?" she asked. "Every chance I get. It will not matter." Her voice was flat. "The story is more interesting than the truth. By tonight, half the district will believe I spent the night in your bed, and by tomorrow my clan will hear of it." Elias set down the hammer he had been holding. "What will they do?" She looked at him for a long moment, weighing something. Then she said, "Orc women are bound by clan law. If I am unmarried and accused of lying with a man outside wedlock, I lose my standing. I cannot trade. I cannot speak in council. I become clanless in everything but name." She paused. "The trading license I hold is worth more than my weight in gold. It took me 8 years to earn it. If I lose it, I lose everything." The words landed like stones in still water. Elias stared at her, something cold and furious building in his chest. "That is not right. It is the law." "Then the law is wrong." She smiled, but it was a bitter thing, all edges. "You are not the first to say so. You will not be the last. It does not change what will happen." He thought of Amelia Voss and Carolyn Marsh at the well, their voices low and eager, passing judgment like it was a game. He thought of Fenna kneeling in the dirt beside him, her hands gentle on the foal's wet body, saving a life because it needed saving. He thought of his dead brother's debt, the note that sat in a drawer in his house, the number that haunted his sleep. He thought of losing everything because of a lie. "What if you were married?" he asked. She went very still. "What, if you were married, they could not strip your standing? Could they?" "No," she said slowly. "But I am not." He met her eyes. "You could be by morning." The silence stretched between them, taut and fragile. She studied his face, searching for something, a joke or a lie or some hidden cruelty. He held her gaze and waited. "You do not know what you are offering," she said finally. "I know what I am offering." "Why would you do this?" He thought about that. The answer was complicated and simple all at once. "Because it is the right thing," he said. "Because you do not deserve to lose everything over a lie. Because I was there too, and if anyone should pay a price, it should be shared." "There is no price on you," she said. "Men do not lose their trades or their names over gossip." "I know." She turned away, pacing to the edge of the forge yard and back, her hands curled into fists. When she spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled. "If we do this, it is a business arrangement, a shield, nothing more." "Agreed. I will not pretend affection I do not feel. I would not ask you to. I will keep my own earnings and my own trade. As you should." She stopped pacing and faced him. "You will want something in return. Men always do." Elias thought of the debt note, the number that woke him at night, the forge that would be seized if he could not pay by midsummer. He thought of asking her for help, for a loan, for some portion of her carefully earned gold. And then he thought of how that would look, how it would feel, a marriage built on her money and his desperation. "No," he said. "I want nothing." She did not believe him. He could see it in her eyes. But she also did not have time to argue, and they both knew it. "There is a priest 2 miles south," she said. "He keeps odd hours. We could go now." Elias looked at the plow horse, half shod and waiting. He looked at the forge, the coals still glowing red, the work that would not finish itself. He looked at Fenna, standing in his yard with her chin up and her shoulders back, proud and desperate all at once. "Let me bank the fire," he said. They walked the 2 miles in near silence, the spring sun warm on their shoulders, the road dusty under their feet. Fenna's stride was long and steady, and Elias found himself matching her pace without effort. Once, a cart passed them going the other direction, and the driver stared openly at the orc woman, his mouth hanging slightly open. Fenna did not acknowledge him. The priest lived in a small stone cottage beside a chapel barely large enough for a dozen people. He answered the door in his nightshirt and blinked at them with bleary, confused eyes. "We need to be married," Elias said. "Now." The priest scratched his head. "It is 10 in the morning." "I am aware. Do you have a license?" "No." "Then I cannot." Fenna stepped forward and placed 3 silver coins on the doorstep. The priest looked down at them, then up at her face, then at the coins again. "I can have the paperwork ready in an hour," he said. They waited in the chapel while he shuffled around in the back, muttering to himself. The space was cool and dim, the walls bare except for a simple wooden cross above the altar. Elias sat on the front pew. Fenna stood by the door, her arms crossed, staring at nothing. "You can still change your mind," he said, "so can you?" "I will not." She glanced at him, something unreadable flickering across her face. "Why do I believe you?" "Because I mean it." The priest returned with a ledger and a quill, the ink still wet on the license. He performed the ceremony with the brisk efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times and wanted to get back to his breakfast. He asked the required questions. They gave the required answers. He pronounced them married in the eyes of the law and the church, made them both sign the ledger, and handed Elias a folded paper sealed with wax. "May you find joy in each other," he said, in the tone of a man who did not particularly care whether they did or not. Outside, the sun was higher, the day growing warm. They walked back toward the village, and Elias was acutely aware of the paper in his pocket, the weight of it, the strangeness of what they had just done. "Where will you stay?" he asked. She looked at him, surprised. "Where will I stay?" "You are my wife now. People will expect you to live at the forge. I have a tent at the clan camp, which is 3 miles away, and if you stay there, people will ask why a wife does not sleep under her husband's roof." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your house is small. It has 2 rooms. You can take the bedroom. I will sleep in the workshop." "That is not, it is fine," he said firmly. "We need to make this look real, at least at first. Once the gossip dies and your standing is secure, you can do as you please." She did not argue, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself just slightly apart from him, a careful distance that spoke of distrust and self-preservation. They reached the village by midday. Elias went straight to the forge and found Marta Henshaw waiting for him, her face pale and stricken. "Elias," she said, rushing forward. "I heard what they are saying. I told them the truth. I swear I did. I told them you were helping with the mare, that you saved her, that you did nothing wrong. But they are not listening. It is all right, Marta," he said gently. "It is handled." "Handled? How?" He pulled the marriage license from his pocket and unfolded it. Marta stared at the paper, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. "You married her this morning." "But you barely know her." "I know her well enough." Marta looked from him to Fenna, who stood quietly by the gate, and back again. "Elias, this is madness. You cannot throw your life away because of stupid gossip." "I am not throwing anything away," he said, more sharply than he intended. "And I will thank you not to speak of my wife that way." The word felt strange in his mouth, "my wife," but he said it firmly with enough conviction that Marta stepped back, her face flushing. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I did not mean, I know." He folded the paper and put it away. "Go home, Marta, check on your mare, and if anyone asks, you can tell them the truth, all of it." She left, glancing back once with a mixture of confusion and something that might have been pity. Elias watched her go, then turned to Fenna. "Come on," he said. "Let me show you the house." It was small, as he had warned. The main room held a table, 2 chairs, a fireplace, and a narrow cot where he usually slept. The second room, hardly bigger than a closet, contained a proper bed, a chest for clothes, and a single small window that looked out on the yard. It had been his brother's room once, before the debt and the drinking and the night he fell into the river and did not come out. Elias did not say any of that. He simply gestured to the bed and said, "It is yours." Fenna stepped into the room, looking around with the careful attention of someone assessing a battlefield. "Where are your things?" "I will bring them out to the workshop." "That is ridiculous. You should keep your own bed. You are not sleeping on the cot." They stared at each other, and for a moment, the absurdity of the situation threatened to crack through the careful formality they had both been maintaining. Then Fenna sighed and set her satchel on the chest. "Fine," she said, "but I am paying for food and firewood. This is not charity." "I did not say it was. You were thinking it." "I was not." She raised an eyebrow, and he realized with some surprise that she was teasing him. It softened her face, made her look younger, less guarded. "I will fetch my things from the camp," she said. "And I will tell the clan elders about the marriage before they hear it elsewhere." "Do you need me to come with you?" "No." She paused at the door. "But thank you for this, for all of it." Before he could answer, she was gone, striding out through the gate and up the north road with that same long, steady pace. Elias stood in the doorway and watched her go, wondering what exactly he had just done. The gossip did not die so much as it shifted. By evening, the village knew about the marriage, and the story became something different. Elias Drummond, the quiet farrier, had fallen so hard for the orc woman that he married her on the spot. It was a scandal. It was a romance. It was the most exciting thing to happen in the village in years. Elias ignored it and went back to work. There were horses to shoe, tools to mend, hinges to forge. The work was steady and familiar, and it kept his hands busy and his mind from circling the same thoughts over and over. Fenna returned at dusk with a bedroll, a leather trunk, and a mare so beautiful it made his chest ache. The animal was a gray dapple, all clean lines and intelligent eyes, the kind of horse that cost more than most men earned in a year. Fenna tied her in the small paddock beside the forge and came inside without a word. They ate a simple supper of bread and cheese, sitting across from each other at the narrow table. The silence was not uncomfortable exactly, but it was heavy with all the things neither of them was saying. "What will you do now?" Elias asked finally. "With your trade, I mean." "Continue as I was," she said. "The spring fairs are coming. I have 3 buyers interested in northern stock, and I need to finalize the contracts before the roads become impassable." "You travel often, then?" "Most of the year." He thought about that. A wife who was rarely home, a marriage that was a name on paper and little else. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like a loss, though he could not say why. "What about you?" she asked. "The forge keeps you busy, busy enough." He hesitated, then added, "My brother left debts. I am working to pay them off." "How much?" The question was blunt, practical. He appreciated that. 200 gold, due at midsummer." She went very still. "That is a great deal." "Yes. Can you pay it?" "I do not know." She was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the grain of the table. Then she said, "If you cannot, what happens?" "They take the forge." "And the house?" He said it flatly, without emotion, because if he let himself feel it, the fear would swallow him whole. Fenna's gaze was steady on his face, and he had the uncomfortable sense that she could see all of it anyway, every sleepless night and grinding worry. "I will not let that happen," she said. "It is not your burden. You married me to save my trade. I will not stand by and watch you lose yours." There was a fierceness in her voice that startled him. He started to argue, then stopped, because he could see in her face that it would do no good. Fenna Farrow did not make idle promises, and she did not offer help she did not mean to give. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded and rose to clear the table. They moved around each other in the small space, awkward but learning, and when they finally said goodnight and retreated to their separate rooms, Elias lay on the cot in the workshop and stared at the ceiling, wondering how his life had become so strange so quickly. The next weeks settled into a rhythm. Elias worked the forge and Fenna managed her trade, riding out before dawn and returning after dark, her satchel full of contracts and correspondence. On the days she stayed in the village, she helped with the horses, her hands quick and sure, her knowledge deep enough that he found himself asking her opinion on everything from lameness to temperament. She answered readily, without condescension, and he began to realize just how much she knew, how carefully she had studied her craft. They spoke little of the marriage or the gossip, or the fact that they were two near strangers sharing a roof and a name. It was easier to focus on the work, on the small practical details of coexistence. She liked her tea dark and bitter. He could not sleep if the fire was not banked just so. She rose before dawn. He stayed up late. They learned each other's rhythms the way one learned a new dance, tentative and careful, trying not to step on each other's feet. The debt, though, was a constant shadow. Elias counted his earnings each week, and each week the number fell short. He took every job that came his way, worked from dawn till well past dark, but it was not enough. The forge was good, but it was not a gold mine, and 200 gold was a sum that would have taken years to save under normal circumstances. Fenna knew. She did not ask, but he could see it in the way she watched him sometimes, a quiet calculation in her eyes. And then, one morning in late spring, she came to the forge with a folded contract in her hand and a grim satisfaction on her face. "The clan council has approved an ironwork order," she said without preamble. 200 hinges, 100 horseshoes, 50 buckles, and assorted hardware for the new longhouses they are building on the ridge. I negotiated the contract. But I can only sign it as a woman in good standing, which I am because of you. Elias looked at the contract, then at her. How much? 150 gold, paid on delivery. His heart kicked hard in his chest. It was not enough to cover the debt entirely, but it was close. Dangerously close. He met her eyes and saw the determination there, the stubborn pride that would not let her owe him anything. "Fenna, do not," she said sharply. "Do not tell me it is too much or that you cannot accept. You married me when you did not have to. You gave me my trade back when I had no right to ask. This is me paying that debt. Let me." He wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her that it had not been a transaction, that he had not married her expecting anything in return. But he also knew that pride was a complicated thing, and for Fenna this mattered. So he nodded and took the contract and read it over carefully, his hand steady despite the relief singing through his veins. "When do you need it finished?" he asked. 6 weeks. He did the math in his head. It was tight but possible. Barely. "I will have it ready." "Good." She hesitated, then added, "The council will inspect the work before they pay. It has to be flawless." "It will be." She believed him. He could see it in the way her shoulders relaxed, the tight line of her mouth easing. "Then we have a deal." They shook hands, formal and serious, and for the first time since the wedding, Elias felt like they were truly partners, bound by something more solid than a piece of paper and a lie they were both trying to outrun. He threw himself into the work. The forge burned hot, the hammer sang, and the days blurred together in a haze of sweat and iron and relentless focus. Fenna helped when she could, working the bellows or sorting the finished pieces, her presence steady and unobtrusive. She did not chatter or distract, and he was grateful for that. The work demanded everything he had, and there was no room for error. 3 weeks in, a man came to the forge. He was tall and broad, with a face like a slab of rock and eyes that calculated everything they saw. He introduced himself as Roland Cray, and he held the note on Elias's brother's debt. "Just checking in," Cray said, his smile thin and cold, "making sure you have not forgotten what is owed." "I have not forgotten," Elias said evenly. "Good, good." Cray walked around the forge yard, peering at the stacks of horseshoes and hinges, the neat rows of finished work. "Busy, I see." "Always. I heard you got married to an orc." He said it like it was a curiosity, something vaguely distasteful. "That true? It is, brave man, or foolish?" Cray laughed, a sound with no warmth in it. "Well, I suppose it does not matter as long as you have my gold by midsummer." "I will have it. You had better." Cray turned to leave, then paused at the gate. "Because if you do not, this forge becomes mine and the house and everything in it." He smiled again. "Just so we are clear." Elias did not answer. He watched Cray walk away, his hands clenched into fists, and felt the cold weight of the debt settle heavier on his shoulders. That night, Fenna found him sitting outside the workshop, staring at nothing. She did not ask what was wrong. She simply sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and waited. "Cray came by today," he said finally. "I saw him leaving. He looked pleased with himself." "He is." Elias rubbed his face. "If I cannot pay by midsummer, he will take everything." "Then we will make sure you can pay. The ironwork contract will not be enough. Even if I finish on time, even if the council approves every piece, I will still be 50 gold short." Fenna was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I have savings." "No." "Elias, no," he said again, more firmly. "This is my debt, not yours. You are my husband." The word hung in the air between them, strange and intimate. Elias looked at her, at the clean lines of her face, the stubborn set of her jaw. "In name only." "That is not," she stopped, her mouth tightening. "You are being foolish, maybe, definitely." They sat in silence, the argument unfinished, neither willing to yield. Above them the stars came out one by one, bright and indifferent. The work continued. Elias pushed himself harder, faster, taking less sleep and fewer breaks. Fenna watched him with growing concern, but she did not try to stop him. She understood what the forge meant, what losing it would do. 4 weeks in, she came to him with news. "The council will inspect the work next week. If they approve, they will pay immediately." Elias nodded, his hands already moving to sort the finished pieces, checking each one for flaws. His eyes burned with exhaustion and his shoulders ached, but the work was good. He knew it was good. The inspection was nerve-wracking. 3 council members came, 2 orc men and 1 woman, all of them stern-faced and exacting. They tested every hinge, examined every horseshoe, weighed buckles in their palms and held them up to the light. Elias stood beside Fenna and waited, his heart beating too fast, his hands steady through sheer force of will. Finally, the eldest counselor, a man named Graven with silver streaking his dark hair, nodded. "The work is acceptable. More than acceptable, you have a fine hand, farrier." Elias let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "Thank you." Graven counted out 150 gold coins, each one heavy and real, and placed them in a leather pouch. He handed it to Fenna, not Elias, a pointed gesture that acknowledged her role in the negotiation. She accepted it with a nod, her face carefully neutral. When they were alone, she gave the pouch to Elias. 50 more, she said quietly. "You need 50 more, I know." "I can, Fenna, please." She looked like she wanted to argue, but she stopped herself. "Fine. But if you cannot find it, you will let me help. Promise me." He did not want to promise, but he also could not bear to lie to her. "I promise." With 1 week left until midsummer, Elias tallied his earnings and came up 30 gold short. He stared at the number, the impossibility of it, and felt something in him break. He had worked himself to exhaustion. He had taken every job, accepted every contract, and it was not enough. Fenna found him sitting at the table, the coins spread out in front of him, his head in his hands. Elias. He did not look up. 30 short. She sat down across from him. I have the gold, I know. Then let me give it to you. It is not that simple. It is exactly that simple. He raised his head and met her eyes. If I take your gold, I am no better than Cray. I am taking from you to save myself. That is not, she stopped, her face tightening with frustration. Elias, this is not the same. You are not some debt collector squeezing coin from desperate people. You are she hesitated, the word catching in her throat. You are my husband. Let me help you. I do not want you to see me as someone who takes. I do not see you that way. Her voice was fierce, raw with something he could not name. I see you as someone who saved me when you did not have to, who gave me my trade back, who has worked himself half to death trying to keep a forge his brother nearly destroyed. And if you lose it because you are too proud to let me help, I will never forgive you. The words hit him like a hammer. He stared at her and something in him cracked wide open, all the fear and pride and exhaustion spilling out. All right, he said hoarsely. All right. She reached across the table and took his hand, her grip warm and strong. We will pay Cray together, as partners. He nodded, unable to speak, and held on. The next morning they went to Cray's house together. He lived in a large, well-appointed home on the edge of the village, the kind of place that spoke of money earned on the backs of other people's misery. He answered the door with a smirk already in place. Drummond and the orc wife, to what do I owe the pleasure? Elias held out the pouch of gold. The debt, paid in full, Cray's smirk faltered. He took the pouch and opened it, counting the coins slowly, his face darkening with each one. When he finished, he looked up, his eyes cold. This clears the note, he said flatly. Then we are done. For now. Cray's gaze flicked to Fenna, something ugly flickering there. You are lucky you married well, Drummond, though I wonder how long an orc will stay loyal when the shine wears off. Fenna stepped forward, her voice like ice. Careful, Cray. You may hold debts over people's heads, but you do not own them, and you do not speak to me or my husband that way. Cray's face flushed red. For a moment, Elias thought he might say something else, something that would force a confrontation. But then Cray simply sneered and stepped back, slamming the door in their faces. They walked back to the forge in silence, the weight of the debt finally, blessedly gone. Elias felt lighter than he had in months, and when he looked at Fenna, he saw the same relief mirrored in her face. Thank you, he said. You already thanked me. I needed to say it again. She smiled, a real smile, soft and unguarded. You are welcome. But the relief was short-lived. 2 days later, Cray came to the forge with a magistrate and a sheaf of papers, his face twisted with vindictive glee. There is a problem, Cray announced. The payment was short. You still owe me 20 gold. Elias stared at him. That is not true. We paid in full. You counted it yourself. I counted wrong, Cray said smoothly. The note was for 220, not 200. A simple mistake. You are lying. Cray's smile was poisonous. Check the note, Drummond. It is all there in writing. The magistrate, a tired-looking man named Howell, held out the note. Elias took it with shaking hands and read it over, his stomach sinking. The number had been altered, crudely but effectively. Where it had once said 200, it now said 220. This is fraud, Elias said, his voice shaking with fury. He changed it. Can you prove it? Cray asked. Elias could not. The original note was long gone and Cray held the only copy. Howell looked between them, his expression pained. If the note says 220, then that is what is owed, he said reluctantly. Unless you can provide evidence to the contrary. He is lying, Elias shouted. He is a thief and a cheat, and you know it. What I know does not matter, Howell said wearily. The law is the law. You have 1 week to pay the remaining 20 gold or Cray can seize the property. Elias wanted to hit something. He wanted to drag Cray into the street and make him confess. But Fenna's hand on his arm stopped him, her grip firm and grounding. We will have it, she said coldly. 1 week. Cray's smile widened. I look forward to it. That night, Elias paced the small house like a caged animal, his rage and helplessness boiling over. He changed the note, he said for the 10th time. He knew we could pay, so he changed it, and there is nothing we can do. Fenna sat at the table, her expression thoughtful. There is something we can do. What? Cray is a bully and a cheat, but he is also predictable. He wants the forge because it is worth more than the debt. If we can prove he altered the note, we can destroy him. How? We do not have the original. No, but we know who does. Elias stopped pacing. My brother is dead. Yes, but his debts were witnessed. Someone signed off on the original loan. If we can find that person, we can compare the numbers. Hope flared, fragile and tentative. Who witnessed it? I do not know, but we have a week to find out. They spent the next 3 days tracking down every person who might have known about the loan. Most had no memory of it or claimed they did not. But on the 3rd day, they found a clerk in the village record house, an old man named Simmons who kept meticulous copies of every transaction that passed through his hands. Drummond's loan, he said, squinting at them over his spectacles. I remember it. Nasty business. Cray pushed that boy into the loan, and the boy was too drunk to read the terms. You have a copy of the original note? Fenna asked. Simmons shuffled through a stack of ledgers, muttering to himself. Finally, he pulled out a thin, yellowed page and laid it on the desk. Here, 200 gold due in 3 years. No mention of interest either, though I would wager Cray tried to add that later. Elias stared at the page, his heart pounding. The number was clear. 200. Not 220. Can we take this to the magistrate? He asked. You can, Simmons said, but you will need me to testify. Cray will claim it is a forgery otherwise. Will you? The old man looked at them both for a long moment. Then he nodded. Cray has been cheating people in this village for 20 years. It is about time someone stood up to him. They brought the copy and Simmons to Magistrate Howell the next morning. Cray was summoned, and he arrived with his smug confidence fully intact, right up until Howell laid the 2 notes side by side on his desk. Explain this, Howell said. Cray's face went pale, then red. That is a fake. The old man forged it. Simmons drew himself up, his voice sharp with indignation. I've kept records in this village for 40 years, and I have never falsified a single entry. The same cannot be said for you, Cray. Howell examined both documents carefully, his expression hardening. Finally, he looked up at Cray. The alteration is obvious. You changed the note after the debt was paid. That is fraud. You cannot prove I can and I will. Howell's voice was cold. The debt is cleared. Drummond owes you nothing. And if I ever catch you altering a contract again, I will see you brought up on charges. Get out of my office. Cray opened his mouth, then closed it. He shot one last venomous look at Elias and Fenna, then stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. Elias stood frozen, barely able to believe it. The debt was gone. Truly, finally gone. Beside him, Fenna let out a long, slow breath, and when he looked at her, she was smiling. It is done, she said quietly. It is done. They walked back to the forge together, and for the first time in months, Elias felt like he could breathe. That night, they celebrated in the small, quiet way of people who were too exhausted for grand gestures. Fenna cooked a stew, rich and savory, and they ate it by the fire, talking about nothing and everything, the conversation easy and unforced. "What will you do now?" she asked. "With the forge secure, I mean. Keep working, I suppose, build the business back up, maybe take on an apprentice someday." He paused. "What about you? Continue my trade. The autumn fairs will be busy. So you will be traveling again?" "Yes." He nodded, trying to ignore the strange hollow feeling in his chest. This was the arrangement. She had her trade, he had his forge, and they were bound by a name and nothing more. It was what they had agreed, but somewhere along the way it had stopped feeling like enough. "Fenna," he said slowly. "What are we doing?" She looked at him, her expression guarded. "What do you mean, this, us? We married to stop gossip and save your trade, we did that. But now," he trailed off, not sure how to finish. "Now what?" Her voice was carefully neutral. "Now I do not want you to leave." The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Fenna's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked utterly lost. "Elias, I know what we agreed," he said quickly. "I know this was never supposed to be real, but it feels real to me. You feel real to me. And I do not know when that happened, but it did." She stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back, her hands curled into fists. "You do not know what you are saying. I do." "No, you do not." Her voice was sharp, almost angry. "You think you know me, but you do not. I am not some grateful woman you saved. I am difficult and stubborn, and I do not know how to be a wife in any way that makes sense. I do not care. You should care." "Why?" He stood and crossed to her, close enough to see the fear in her eyes, the vulnerability she was so desperate to hide. "Fenna, I do not need you to be anything other than who you are. I just need you to be here. What if I am terrible at this?" "At what?" She gestured helplessly between them. "At this, at us, at being married for real. Then we will figure it out together." She stared at him, and he saw the moment the walls came down, the moment she stopped fighting. "I do not want to leave either," she whispered, "but I am afraid." "Of what?" "Of disappointing you. Of not being enough." He reached out and took her hands, holding them gently. "You are already more than enough." Her breath hitched, and then she was leaning into him, her forehead resting against his chest, her shoulders shaking. He wrapped his arms around her and held on, feeling the weight of all the fear and loneliness she had been carrying. "I am not good at this," she said against his shirt. "Neither am I." "Then we are both fools, probably." She laughed, a soft, broken sound, and he felt something in his chest ease. They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the firelight, and when they finally pulled apart, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Stay," he said. "Not because you have to, because you want to." "I want to," she said. "I want to try." "Then that is enough." They did try. Over the summer, they learned each other in ways that went deeper than shared space and practical coexistence. Elias discovered that Fenna sang when she thought no one was listening, old clan songs in a language he did not understand. She learned that he had a dry, quiet sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. They argued about small things and large ones, learning how to fight without cruelty, how to disagree without retreating. And slowly, carefully, they fell in love. It was not a lightning strike or a grand romantic gesture. It was Fenna bringing him tea when he worked too late, and Elias braiding her hair when her hands were tired from a long day. It was shared meals and quiet evenings, and the way their hands found each other without thought. It was trust, hard-won and fiercely protected. By the time midsummer came around again, they had been married a full year. Fenna came to him one evening and said, "I want to marry you again." He looked up from the horseshoe he was shaping, surprised. "We are already married. By human law. I want to marry you by orc custom, in front of my clan. So there is no question, no doubt that this is real." He set down the hammer and crossed to her, cupping her face in his hands. "You are sure?" "I am sure." The ceremony was held at midsummer, on the ridge where the clan had built their new longhouses. It was nothing like the hurried, half-asleep wedding in the chapel. This was fire and music, and the whole clan gathered to bear witness. Fenna wore a tunic embroidered with her family's symbols, and Elias wore his best shirt, freshly mended and clean. They spoke vows in both human and orc, promising loyalty and partnership and a future built together. When it was done, Graven clasped Elias's arm and said, "You have brought honor to our clan, Farrier. Welcome." Elias felt the words settle in his chest, warm and solid. He looked at Fenna, at the joy and relief on her face, and knew he would never regret the choice he had made that morning a year ago. After the ceremony, they walked back to the forge together, hand in hand. The village was quiet, the streets empty in the late evening light. When they reached the gate, Elias stopped and pulled Fenna close. "I love you," he said, the words simple and true. She smiled, her eyes bright. "I love you too." They went inside, and Elias lit the lamp on the table, the same lamp that had burned all night a year ago while they saved Marta Henshaw's mare. Fenna saw him looking at it and laughed. "That damned lamp," she said. "If it had not burned so long, none of this would have happened." "Maybe," Elias said, "or maybe it would have happened anyway, just slower." "Do you really believe that?" He thought about it, about the way their lives had collided and tangled, about the choices they had made and the path that had brought them here. "I do," he said finally. "I think we were always going to find each other. The lamp just sped things up." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, and he pulled her close, grateful beyond words for the gossip and the mare and the strange, winding road that had led them both home. The next morning they hung a new sign above the forge. It was carved oak, simple and sturdy, and it bore both their names, Drummond and Farrow, farrier and horse trader. Marta Henshaw was the first to see it. She stopped in the street and stared, then smiled and waved. "It suits you both," she called. Elias waved back, and Fenna leaned against him, her hand warm in his. They stood there for a moment, looking at the sign, at the forge, at the life they had built from rumor and desperation and something far more enduring. "You ever regret it?" Fenna asked quietly. "Marrying me that morning," he turned to her, his answer swift and certain. "Never, not for a moment," she smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Good, because you are stuck with me now. I can think of worse fates." They went back to work, side by side, as the village woke around them. The gossip had long since moved on to other scandals, other stories. But every now and then, someone would mention the farrier and the orc woman who had married in a hurry and stayed together by choice. And the story would be told again, softer this time, with a warmth that had not been there at the start. And in the small house beside the forge, Elias and Fenna built a life. It was not always easy. They still argued, still stumbled over misunderstandings and old fears. But they always came back to each other, and that, in the end, was what mattered. Years passed. The forge thrived, and Fenna's trade expanded to cover 3 districts. They became a fixture in the village, the kind of couple people pointed to when they wanted to prove that love could surprise you, that it could arrive in the strangest ways and still be real. On their 5th anniversary, Fenna told him she was pregnant. Elias stared at her, the words not quite sinking in, and then he laughed and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she squealed and swatted at him. "Put me down, you fool." He set her down carefully, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "A baby, a baby." He kissed her long and slow and felt the future unfurl in front of them, bright and full of promise. Their son was born in the spring, small and squalling and perfect. They named him Bennett, and he had his mother's green skin and his father's dark eyes. And from the moment he drew his first breath, he owned them both completely. Elias held his son and marveled at the weight of him, the miracle of him. He looked at Fenna, exhausted and radiant in the bed, and felt a gratitude so deep it defied words. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "For what? For staying? For taking the chance? For all of it?" She reached for his hand and squeezed. "It was the easiest choice I ever made." Bennett grew, and the forge rang with the sound of his laughter. He toddled after his father, banging on scraps of metal with a stick, and followed his mother to the paddock, cooing at the horses. The village, which had once whispered about the strange marriage, now smiled to see the little family, green-skinned boy and all. When Bennett was 2, Fenna became pregnant again, and this time it was a girl. They named her Violet, and she was fierce and loud and utterly fearless. She climbed everything, demanded stories at all hours, and once tried to shoe a horse by herself when she was barely 4. Elias found her in the forge, hammer in hand, and nearly had a heart attack before he realized she had not managed to do any actual damage. "She is just like you," he told Fenna that night, exasperated and fond. "No," Fenna said, grinning. "She is like both of us, stubborn." They built a life full of noise and work and love, and if Elias sometimes looked at his wife and marveled at how much had changed since that morning they married in a hurry, he kept it to himself. There was no need to say it aloud. Fenna knew. She always knew. On their 10th anniversary, they stood in the forge yard, watching Bennett and Violet chase each other around the paddock. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and the air smelled of summer and growing things. "I would do it all again," Elias said quietly. "Every moment, every choice." Fenna leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. "So would I." They stood there as the light faded, surrounded by the life they had built from gossip and grace, and knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. The forge stood, and the sign above it bore 2 names, carved deep and meant to last. Inside, the fire burned steady, a light in the gathering dusk, and in the small house beside it, a family gathered for supper, their voices mingling in laughter and warmth. It had started with a rumor, a hurried wedding, and 2 near strangers bound by circumstance. But it had become something far greater. It had become a home, a partnership, a love that had been tested and proven and built to last. And in the end, that was the best story of all.